Hey, welcome to KC201, and you are in the room where it's happening. We are talking today about welcoming and volunteers. So we're doing this specifically for leaders or leaders to be in Kids Club, for you guys to learn a little bit more about what it looks like to welcome people to your teams. And just to kind of, before we go into a lot of details and everything, the goal of tonight is not to answer 100% of every question that you might have as a leader. Or to answer everything about team building or anything like that. The point of tonight is just to pique your interest and maybe give you one or two things to try. So we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. We're going to kind of go through things. There's a video we're going to watch. There'll be some discussion. If you're tuning in live, there is an option for you to chat in if you've got questions or you've got answers to things. But in the meantime, we're going to start in a minute with an icebreaker, which is going to be led by Kristen, who's back there. But just a word of introduction. My name is Chris. I'm your site director for Kids Club in Oakley. I've been on staff now for almost 3 years. Prior to me doing this, I led the kindergarten to 5th grade teams. And then prior to that, I worked at the Children's Theater of Cincinnati as an actor and playwright and director, where I was attending Crossroads and applying a lot of leadership principles that I was learning here from the weekend to my work at the theater. And who knew? It worked. I've seen that a lot of those strategies continue to work as I'm on staff here. When we practice what we preach, it goes pretty well. We're not always very good at that, and we know that, and we want to fix that. One of the ways that we're going to fix that is by having more opportunities like this for you to grow as leaders, but also for Kids Club volunteers in general, to have ongoing training, like not in a way where you have to come to the big thing where there's hundreds of people there. But, you know, if we believe, and I believe this is true, that real growth and development happens in circles, not in rows, we need to make more circles. And a lot of times for events like that, we just make more rows. So this is meant to be interactive. If you've got questions and stuff, I want to answer those questions. We'll have an extended time for questions after, and we can address a lot of that way. This is Kristen Fissinger. She now leads the kindergarten and 5th grade teams here. She's been on staff 6 months-ish now. And she's going to begin by just leading us in an icebreaker. Yeah. Do you want to, how about we leave food in here for a sec, and then we go ahead and do the icebreaker, and then we'll come back. If you're tuning in from home, please go ahead and enjoy some food. And you can watch the icebreaker. I'm going to take the computer with us, and you can see what we're doing. If you want to skip ahead to when the content begins, just wait until the screen looks like this again. And then we'll pick up right where we left off. But for now, we're going to go do an icebreaker. Let's go ahead.
Yeah. I think they're switches off.
Oh, these are switches.
I think they are.
I was going like this to try to get them to move.
Motion sensors.
Go ahead.
I feel like they are all good.
Thanks, friends. Way to be leaders. Go find the lights. Yay, thank you. Yeah. So our icebreaker is just a way to get to know a lot of people in this room. So we're going to line up, talking to each other is okay. By calendar, your birthday. So your birthday is in April 13th. Might be in the middle. And we'll line up from January 1 through December 31st down there. Ready? Go.
March 13th.
Take the January one.
I'll take the lead.
February?
I'm March.
This is July here.
Kids acted like this. I know, right? Do we do it? Are we done? Sure. Okay, do you want to, we can go on the line, make sure we actually did it right. We get an A+ or a B-.
I'm Emily, January 30th.
I'm Jeff, March 26th.
Chris, May 9th.
Michael, May 13th. Scott, June 27th.
Benjamin, July 22nd.
Talisha, July 31st.
Kelly, August 16th.
Kara, September 15th.
Lexan, Lauren, October 7th.
Brandon, October 29th.
I am November 10th.
Karen, November 28th.
Ashley, December 17th.
Right.
Cool. This one's gonna be a little bit trickier. We're gonna line up alphabetically, but it's the last letter of your last name.
Okay.
Some of you are related, so you might have to change
What is yours?
The last letter.
The last letter of your last name.
B.
Coming out too.
You're
Sure.
You're right. What's yours?
Okay, your
Last
letter.
Last letter.
Your S?
Your
R.
R.
Okay. RS.
So much trickier.
Think about it. RRS. Okay. We're good now. Sorry.
We have to go to the next letter, right? If we're all S.
Sure.
Make extra complicated.
Wait, so the second to last
Hold
letter?
up, time out. Wait a minute. Okay, so my last name is Chambers. So is it CH or is it the S? And the N? Okay. And we just stay there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just checking.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yes,
Just-
Karen Eddingfield,
Maya McIntyre. Benjamin McIntyre.
Alexia Illingworth.
Asha Manuel.
Scott Beal. Brandon Henson.
Emily Henson.
Kelly Smoker.
Jeff Smoker.
Talisha Chambers.
Kara Hawkins. Lauren Bushhouse.
Michael Biggs.
Yay! This is so good. Do you want to talk for one more?
Yeah, we got time for one.
Okay, so the year and the date that you started volunteering in Kids Club, from like dinosaurs to like
I'm sorry.
2 days.
I'm like,
Yeah,
June.
like, you know. Or like the year maybe, if you can't remember the date, the year and the month maybe.
2016. Me too.
This is like the 22 years ago and like the 0 days.
all right, so we're, I guess, yeah, probably.
Erie Avenue versus the site. I love it.
Okay, let me think about this. I go by how old my oldest is. And she's 20, she'll be 22
Hold on,
this year.
where is the
Spring of 20. You're right. I think we work together. I was around
She's like, where's your phone?
It was before.
Cool.
Because it was right.
I think we got it. Okay, so just to get a little bit of feel of the room, how about you just say your name one more time? 'Cause third time's the charm, right? Repetition.
Yeah.
And you have a name tag too, which really helps. And maybe the year you started serving and what you do in Kids Club.
I'm Scott Beal. I started serving at pretty sure it's 2001.
Woo!
And I do operations out in the hallway on Saturday night.
I'm Sharon Eddingfield, and I think it was probably, we came in 04, something like that. And I think we started serving in 5 or 6. And I serve in 2E on Sundays.
Carla Webb, and I think it was 2006. And I kindergarten.
Okay, Asha Manuel, 2011, October 2011, and I lead nursery on Sunday.
I'm Kelly Smoker, and my husband and I do, with our son Nick, do the 2F at 10 o'clock on Sundays.
And I'm Jeff Smoker. And same as what you just said.
Lauren Bushhouse. I work with nursery at 8:30. And I started serving in February of 2016.
I'm Emily Henson. I started serving in February of 2016 as well, and I float all the nurseries at 11:45. depending on the week.
I'm Karis Hawkins, and I started serving in 2016. I can't remember the month, but I'm with the preschoolers.
And I'm Brandon Henson. We'll go with the summer of 2016. And usually I'm in this room with Emily, nursery A.
I'm Talisha, and I started serving, I want to say May of 2017, and you'll find me Saturdays 6:15 serving in nursery A.
I'm Alexa Ann, this is Maya and Benjamin, and we started serving August 2017, and we're in twos on Saturday night.
I'm Michael Biggs. I started in October of 2017, and I help in the third and fourth graders at 12 or 11:45 on Sundays.
I'm Melissa Early. I serve at the Sunday 10:05 welcome team.
Cool. That's all I have for you. Thanks for being broken by ice.
Great. Let's go back in the room. Let's finish eating.
Melissa Early, that's ironic. No, I'm kidding. I know.
Like my husband, I should take the name.
Well, I was debating. I know, right?
Yeah.
I need something else.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. Couldn't get it set up anymore. Not a great number.
All right. So now that we've gotten to get to know each other a little bit, those kinds of things are always interesting to me. Like to hear some folks who have been around for a long time. I think of you as our vets, and then folks who are newer. I just think of you as newbies, and I'm just glad that all of you guys are here. I think we're going to hear a diversity of opinions and experiences, but I'm hoping that what we'll do for the rest of the night will be useful to all of us in some way. So to refresh on our mission, before we go into anything else, it's good to remember why we do what we do. The greater mission of Crossroads is not up on the screen. Can anybody recite it from memory? Crossroads mission statement.
Something about connecting seekers to a growing community of growing Christ followers.
Who are
Changing the world.
Changing the world. That's right. So we connect seekers, and a lot of times we stop there, like, oh, we're just here to connect with seekers. But we connect seekers with a community of growing Christ followers who are changing the world. And I think we can often forget a lot of that other stuff. For me, and this is just kind of my story, I believe that the way that God has wired me to change the world is one kid at a time. The way that I do that tends to be in larger group settings like this or through video, things like that. And I was able to find my place from volunteering in Kids Club. And that's led to me being on staff right now, but it still comes back to this mission statement right here. So this connects directly to the Crossroads mission statement. Our mission in Kids Club is that we create fun, welcoming, and safe environments for kids, families, and volunteers to experience God and grow in their faith. So what we do in KC201 is, if we imagine fun, welcoming, and safe as one axis on like a tic-tac-toe grid, and then we look at kids, families, and volunteers as the other axis, we just pick the intersection of two of those things for each topic. So the first time we did this, we talked about how do kids have fun? So we connected fun with kids. This time we're focusing on how do we welcome volunteers. Now, all of this is not just so that we can puff ourselves up and be like, Crossroads and Kids Club is awesome, even though we are, like, we're pretty great. But this is so that everybody we interact with when we're serving experiences God and grows in their faith. So before we go into anything else, like, that is why I'm here. That's why I do this work. All of the stuff we talk about tonight is not going to matter unless we are helping people experience God and grow in their faith. Yes? Yes? Yeah. Great. So as we're looking at welcoming and volunteers, roughly tonight is going to be broken up into 3 parts. We'll take a break about halfway through. The first is talking about servant leadership. Then we'll talk about how to shepherd a flock. That's actually one of my favorite things to share. And then how to build a team. We structured it this way specifically so that we could begin with some broad vision, narrow it into what the Bible says about what we're supposed to do as leaders, and then the how-tos are at the end. What do you do now? So we'll come back to those at the end. Questions you guys asked when you RSVP'd, thank you for doing that, had to do with a lot of stuff that's actually very super relevant to what we do in Kids Club. How can I support the team? Next steps for leadership. How are other churches with similar formats to Crossroads addressing the needs and situations we typically serve? Do we provide a better experience, or do we have opportunities to improve? How can I build community? That's a great question. How do I get involved in multiple parts of Kids Club? What is next for me to get the team where I want it to be? How do I foster volunteer development? Now, if your question wasn't up there, it probably means we may not address it in this specific training, but it is helpful to us as staff to know, like, what are the gaps in knowledge? What are the gaps in, like, what our people know how to do? So if you don't see your question up there, no worries. We may have time to touch on it towards the end, or we'll cover it in another training. All right. So to begin with servant leadership, if anybody has a Bible on their phone, do you want to whip it out and look up Matthew 20:28? If you want to look that one up, just say got it.
Got it.
Cool.
Matthew 20:28.
Someone else take Mark 10:45.
I can get that.
Okay. And then the next one is a bit longer, but it's John 13:1-17.
I got it.
Cool. Matthew 20:28. Do you have that one yet?
Yeah, and I'll be okay.
Yes.
Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Great. Mark 10:45.
Yeah, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Great. All right, and then John.
Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew that the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them.
Great. Thank you, readers. So this kind of thing is definitely a through line in the Gospels, such to the point that of the big four, 3 of them made a point to talk about how Jesus modeled servant leadership. Not only does he say, I haven't come to be served, but I'm here to serve, but then he also puts it into practice. He practices what he preaches. So if Jesus is doing this, we should do this as well. And there was no question who was the leader of the disciples. Yes? And yet he chose to serve them. Now, servant leadership is kind of a buzzword right now, especially in a lot of corporate circles in America. I don't remember what I was listening to, but I was listening to something this weekend. Gosh, maybe it was Super Bowl. I don't know. But somebody said, I'm concerned that a lot of the people who talk about servant leadership aren't actually interested in servant leadership. They're interested in appearing like a servant leader when they actually just want to do the least amount so that they look like they're washing feet, but they're not actually going to wash everybody's feet. I just want to watch one with a lot of publicity, and then I'm going to go about being the leader, right? We need to make sure as we're stepping into leadership, whether it's staff, volunteer, whatever, in a spiritual context, we are held accountable to be the kinds of leaders Jesus would want us to be. We're here to become leaders in Kids Club. That way we can rule other people. If that's what we're about, like, it's time to go. All right. What we are about here is to serve. It's still to serve. So we're gonna look at this through a number of lenses. The first one is when you have observers in the room. Do we think of them from the point of view of how can they do stuff for me? Like, how can they improve the experience for me? Or do we think from the point of view of empathy and saying, what's going on with this person today? How can I serve them today? I'll just speak for me. When there's a lot of stuff going on and a weekend's kind of hairy, you know the feeling? I know the feeling. And then there's an observer in there. Sometimes I have that inward, like, groaning feeling of like, oh man, I'm gonna have to do everything. When in fact, I should feel like I get to do everything. I get to give this observer an amazing first experience. They're not there to serve me. I'm actually here to serve them because they took a step. They filled out an application. They went to KC201. They ended up in a room. Who knows what their comfort level is, but they're here. My job is to give them the best possible experience. And yes, we want to keep kids safe. We want to make sure we do the lesson and all that. But if we want to welcome people to our team, if we want to build our team, man, when those observers are coming, we need to serve them. So what can we do to serve them? That's the first thing for us to think about. We used to say this all the time in Kids Club. I don't know why we don't say it as much anymore. But even within staff, we would say, if we are Kids Club, our job is to take the low place. We take the low place. In Kids Club, a lot of you, you're in rooms where you literally get low to be on your hands and knees with a kid. We mean that in a literal sense, but we also mean it in a figurative sense. If you're the leader and a situation comes up in a room that's a little bit hairy or is going to be a little bit difficult, if we're honoring our team, especially the newer people, we will handle that ourselves. We will take the low place. That could be a difficult conversation with a volunteer or a parent. That could be handling a conflict among kids if they're old enough to kind of be fighting with each other. It could be, this kid's too old enough to have their diaper changed, but someone's got to do it, right? As leaders, we want to take the low place. If we ever get to the point where we are trying to always take the high place, we have completely missed the point of what Jesus was teaching us, all right? So that means humility. And I like humility for real. Like, humility is similar to servant leadership, where a lot of people just want to appear humble, just humble enough. But true humility, inward humility, remember the word humility and human come from the same word that means earth, the same word where we get hummus. We want to be low. We want to consider other people higher than ourselves, more worthy than ourselves. I think Chuck says from Main Stage a lot that a great definition of love, we're supposed to love one another. Love is ascribing worth to another person at cost to myself. And as leaders, we need to make sure we're doing that. And then finally, has anybody been exposed to the idea of the 5 dysfunctions of a team? Has anybody heard that? Great. So that's going to be one of the things we touch on again later. If you haven't watched this video, just look up 5 dysfunctions of a team on YouTube. It is worth half an hour of your time. And basically, he kind of goes through what are the 5 things that make corporate teams or ministry teams absolutely fall apart. And what it all comes down to is whether there is trust within the team, whether there's trust. And in terms of leadership, the way that you create trust is by being vulnerable. You can't expect somebody else who's just met you or has just come into Kids Club to like hit the ground, start being vulnerable if we're not doing that first. So one thing to think about, and maybe we don't want to go like into like dark, deep, depressing waters, right? Stay upbeat. But do we put on a face when we're in Kids Club? Perhaps, you know, perhaps we're feeling one way and we feel like we got to put on the kids club face and we create this invulnerability. Look, if people are coming to Crossroads, they're interested in authenticity. That was one of the things that drew me to this place. And if a person starts getting involved and they start receiving less authenticity, the more involved they get, that means something's wrong. Like something's not right there. And I wonder if we're losing that ethic of still being authentic. It's just something about it. Anyway, so the way that you build trust within your team is by being vulnerable, by sharing what's really going on, sharing how you're really doing, all of that. So to dive more into this idea of trust, we're going to watch a video by my boy, Andy Stanley. He's the senior pastor of some big church. I don't remember the name of the church. North Point? He's the senior pastor of North Point Church. He's written a ton of books. He's a really influential ministry figure. And we're going to show you about 15 minutes or so of a talk he gave a few years ago about trust versus suspicion. Now, to just kind of set this up, he is in a context where he is speaking to people who are in paid ministry. So he's talking to pastors, associate pastors, church secretaries, probably some youth ministers as well. But the principles that he lays out here are really, really basic, but they're really, really helpful. This is the kind of stuff that we as staff are repeatedly exposed to. We watched this specific video towards the beginning of this year, and our executive pastor, Darren Yates, asked the room, like, how many of you have seen this video before? And like half the room had not seen it. So it is good for us to recenter on some of the ideas here. And we're going to go right into it. Kristen, can you hit the lights?
Yeah. People can get to it at any time.
And I think, and I could be wrong, this is just my opinion, I think this is at the heart of what it takes to create a healthy staff culture. I think if you get this right, everything else can be figured out. But if you get this wrong, you'll never, ever, ever make much progress when it comes to creating healthy culture. Now, I've talked to pastors, and maybe you're a lead pastor who falls in this category. I've talked to lead pastors saying, we don't have time for that. Here comes Sunday, here comes Sunday, here comes Sunday. That's a nice to have. And I would say to you, as we're going to say in just a few minutes, if you want to attract great people to your staff, then this must become a priority. Because here's what I know with 14 years of experience. If you get this right, you will attract healthy, competent, get it done people. If you miss this, you will run them off. Because healthy people are attracted to healthy cultures. Healthy people don't stay in unhealthy cultures. Unhealthy people thrive in unhealthy cultures. It's what they're most comfortable with. And I'm all for having a ministry. I try very hard not to hire a ministry. The corollary to that is have a ministry, don't marry a ministry. If that sounds harsh, just wait till you have a teenage daughter who's about 16 and she brings some guy home that you think, he'd be great. There's a ministry. Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like a father up there. Okay. Now, if you have your notebooks, I want you to turn with me to page, I think it's 87. Is that right? Is that where we are? 86. We're going to do some fill in the blanks. Why do I do fill in the blanks? Because I can go faster. So we're going to do a few fill in the blanks. If you don't like fill in the blanks, you don't have to fill them in. If you love fill in the blanks, then get your pen out. Here we go. Number one, Roman numeral 1. Occasionally, there are gaps between what we expect people to do and what they actually do. Is that true in your organization? Occasionally, you say, well, not just occasionally. You should meet my middle school guy. Occasionally, there's a gap between what we expect people to do and what we actually experience. And here's what it looks like. Expectations, experience. Here's what I expect. Here's what I experience. I expected you to start the meeting at 9. I experienced you didn't start until 9:15. I expected quality. I got something that I would be embarrassed to turn in if I were you. I expected this. Here's what I got. And in the middle, look up here, in the middle is a gap. Now here's the bottom line of what I want to communicate with you the next few minutes. And this is not intuitive. Stay with me. As leaders, we choose what to put in this gap. And what you as the leader choose to put in this gap consistently will shape your culture. And what you choose to put in this gap consistently, the other people in your organization will put there as well. In your notes, the first blank is choose. And then here are the options. We either assume the worst or we believe the best. Now, when I say that, that kind of makes sense, but here's where we lose this principle. Our experiences, no, Andy, I don't choose what goes there. I emotionally automatically go there. And depending on how you're wired, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, this gap between here's what I expect of you and here's what I experience from you, in this gap is a lot of emotion. But here's what I want you to hear me say. Once you've waded through the motion, you as a leader have the opportunity to choose what you put in this gap. And you will either assume the worst or you will believe the best. This is a simple idea that has the potential to revolutionize your staff culture. And if you get this right, a lot of other things become very, very simple. If you get this wrong, a lot of things won't ever be able to be fixed in your organizational culture. Now, back to your notes. There are a couple of things that determine what we put in this gap. The first fill in the blank is what I see. Two things that make it difficult for us to believe the best. Number one, what I see. What I see is that week after week after week, you give me a shoddy product, and so consequently, I just begin to assume the worst. Week after week after week, you're late to the meeting, so I begin to assume the worst. Month after month, you blow your budget, so I begin to assume the worst. One of the things that influences what we put in the gap is what we see, the experiences, the performance. But there's something else that determines what we put there. Number two is who I am. Who I am. We're all afraid of something. Your fears determine, to some extent, how you view the people you work with. We've all been hurt in the past, haven't we? We've all been betrayed. Your past hurt and betrayal will influence you emotionally in terms of what you put in the gap and how quick you put it there. We're all a bit insecure. We're all a bit territorial. We like certain types of people, and there are people that we don't like. But every time there is a gap, you make a choice. And the choice you make will begin to influence and drive the entire culture of your organization. And the more trust there is in your organization, the better it is. And the less trust there is, the worse it is. And trust is not just determined by what you see and what you experience. It is a decision that you make. Back to your notes. Roman numeral 2. Developing a culture of trust is critical to the health and success of your organization. I want to try to illustrate this, and I could spend a lot of time on it, so I'm going to try to make this quick. But let me read it again. Developing a culture of trust is critical to the health of your organization. Marcus Buckingham wrote a book called The One Thing. Anybody read The One Thing by Marcus Buckingham? Shout out for Marcus Buckingham. Incredible book, right? Our staff, our leadership team spent several months working through this book. At the beginning of this book, he gives an illustration that's so extraordinarily powerful, and here's the illustration. There was a group that did research on married couples, and they studied these couples for 20 years. And they were trying to find the common denominator among happily, highly compatible couples. And their theory going into this research was this. They assumed that the people who were happiest together were the people that knew each other the best, and consequently lowered their expectations over time so that they were rarely ever disappointed with each other, and consequently were able to stay together and stay in love. They expected the people who were most compatible and people they would consider happy to be couples who were so realistic in their estimation of each other that that's what facilitated their ability to stay together. What they discovered was the very opposite. What they discovered in happily married couples was this, that when one of the people in the relationship did something really ridiculous and created a gap, in the happily married couples, the other person in the relationship would automatically believe the best about them, and would come up in their minds with some explanation as to why she's late again, why he wasn't on time, why she spent so much money, why he had to travel as much. That in their minds, they fabricated a belief system, and they just naturally or over time learn to believe the best about their spouse. And the conclusion of this research is this: that love really is blind. That it's really blind. That people who are really in love and stay in love, they just have this is amazing, they have such an inflated view of their spouse that even when their spouse totally screws up, there's a sense in which they say, well, yeah, that did happen, but I'm sure there's a good reason. I'm sure as soon as he gets home and we talk about it, I'm sure it's going to work out. And they found this consistently. Now, you say, well, that's kind of living in denial. Well, in some respects it is. But hey, if it results in a happy marriage, hey, I'm all for denial, aren't you? Now let me flip it around. I'll show you how powerful this is. Don't raise your hand. Do you really want to be married to someone who truthfully points out your flaws every single day? No, honey, I see you're still overweight. Honey, your nose is still a bit crooked. You're still short. And you know what? They could point these things out every single day. Now listen, this is important. They could point it out every single day, and they would be absolutely right. They would be telling you the absolute truth. And you would be extraordinarily unhappy. See, I don't want friends who know my faults to consistently point out my faults. You say, Andy, are you insecure? Of course I'm insecure. I'm a human, right? Do you really want a friend that consistently points out all the things that are wrong with you? Or are your friends the people you consider close to you, the people who overlook your faults and love you anyway and just believe the best? Those are your friends. That's how relationships begin. That's how relationships stay strong. Now, that's what the research says. I think that same dynamic is a powerful, powerful staff culture principle that we as church leaders who have been commanded to love one another unconditionally, to love as Christ loved us, not the way we've been loved by other people. I think this is a powerful principle that once we begin to implement, when there are gaps between what we expect and what we experience, this has the power to shape your culture in such a way that untrustworthy people become trustworthy, and the trustworthy people want to be in your organization. But I'm telling you, just like in those marriages they studied, it is a choice. We choose to believe the best. A, trust fuels productivity. Trust fuels productivity. Every one of you want to have a productive organization. I mean, that's why we do what we do. Trust fuels productivity. Here's what I wrote in my notes. You don't need to try to write this down. The message of trust is this. I just made this up. The message of trust is this. Listen to this. Isn't this where you want to work? The message of trust is this. I think you are smart enough to know what to do and how to do it. And if you screw up, I think you'll tell me and then fix it. See, if there's a gap between what I expect and what I experience, I believe you're smart enough to know how to do what I've asked you to do. And I trust that if you're not, you're going to tell me, and that when you screw up, you're going to fix it. That's the message. That's the atmosphere. That's the culture of trust. And as leaders, we establish that and maintain it. And it is contagious. One of the things I tell my staff at least once or twice a year in our staff meetings, I said, look, if you want to really make me mad as your leader or your boss, let me catch you running around with a WWAD bracelet on. You know, what would Andy do? What would Andy do? If I ever hear that you waste 30 seconds of your time in a meeting with other people going, I wonder what Andy would do, I said, I'm going to be mad. I'll be far more upset about you trying to figure out what I would want than I would you doing something you think is right and it being wrong. Because I don't want you spending time trying to please me. I want you to do what's best for the organization. And guess what? if you do what you think is best for the organization, and as it turns out there's a gap, I trust that you're going to get it right the next time. But I don't want you running around trying to figure out what I would do, because in a culture of trust, I hired you because I believe you know what needs to be done, and I'm trusting you to do it. And if you screw it up, I think you're going to let me know as soon as you know. And then you know what? I think you are going to fix it. And you don't have to sit around and try to figure out what I would do. Letter B. A culture characterized by trust attracts trustworthy people. Now listen to me. This is so huge. Let me finish the statement. A culture characterized by trust attracts trustworthy people and quickly surfaces those who aren't. That this is not intuitive. And for you micromanagers, I'm telling you, you need to underline this, circle this. The problem is if you're a micromanager, you don't know you are, but the people that work with you know you are. And if they just all cut their eyes at each other and hope you didn't see it, then you know you've been nailed, okay? In other words, let me say it this way. I'm about to tell you the secret. I'm about to give you the secret of driving out of your organization everybody who's not trustworthy. Now you're interested. Number one. You will never know who you can't trust until you trust them. You will never know, in a volunteer sense, in a staff sense, you will never know, an elder thing, you'll never know who you can't trust until you trust them. In my notes, I wrote this: the quickest way to surface the untrustworthy people in your organization is to trust them. The longer you refuse to trust, the longer untrustworthy people can hide in your organization. You see how that works? You see, now this is why it's so important. You see, it's not intuitive to put believe the best when there's a gap. But the faster and the quicker and the more consistent you put believe the best, the quicker you surface the people you shouldn't believe the best about. Intuitively, we say, no, if there's a gap, I'm going to assume the worst until you prove you're innocent. And you know what? This will shape your culture. And great people don't want to work here. They want to work in an organization where I say to you, I believe you know how to do what I've hired you to do. I trust you to do it. And if you screw up, I think you'll tell me. I don't have to spy on you. And then I think you'll fix it. I don't think you'll continue to make the same mistake. In your notes, I have this quote from Jim Collins' book, Why the Mighty Fall, or How the Mighty Fall. Awesome book. Awesome book. We're in the middle of it with our leadership team. Several of our leadership teams in our organization are picking their way through this book. Awesome book. Listen to this quote. The moment you feel the need to tightly manage someone, you might have made a hiring mistake. The moment that it's like, well, I just have to assume the worst because, you know, she didn't get it right and he doesn't get it right and I just have to tightly manage him. Jim Collins says, and I would say, amen, chances are you have a hiring problem. And if you don't address the hiring problem, you may accidentally create a culture where everybody begins to mistrust everybody else in the organization. Number 3. Trusting, and here's where you're already pushing back. Some of you are like, yeah, but you don't know my staff. One of two things is true. You're leading poorly or you hired poorly. But there's poorly on both sides, right? You don't know my staff. Well, that's because you lead poorly or you hired poorly. But to maintain a culture of dis and mistrust because of the people around you is not a solution. That's a disease. That's a cancer that will continue to eat away at your organization. Number 3, trusting is risky. So when you go, oh, this is risky, of course it is. Trusting is risky. If you have a 16-year-old son or daughter and you gave them the keys to a car and they drove off, trusting's risky, isn't it? Right? I mean, what about getting married? Fortunately, we're too young to think it through, right? Now, if you're older and are getting remarried or second or third marriage, you know how it works. You got their social security number. You've run a background check. You got, because you finally figured it out. Wait a minute. Forever and ever, no matter what happens, I do. Are you kidding me? I mean, how risky is that? Trusting is risky. Refusing to trust is riskier. Organization, I guarantee you. I wrote a question in my notes. You know how many times a trustworthy person will make the same mistake? They won't. They won't. Because trustworthy people fix their mistakes. Letter C. Trust enables, third characteristic, trust enables an organization to move faster. Trust enables an organization to move faster. One of the things that's just, there's books about this, but the reality of organizational life is that there's silos, right? You know what a silo is? Student ministry, worship ministry, administration, the pastor's office, facilities, silos. There's these silos. And the problem in organizational life with silos is that silos sort of become miniature organizations within the organization, right? And in a really unhealthy organization, the communication between silos is terrible. There's competition between silos. They compete for money and resources among silos, and they're horrible. So there are all kinds of books about getting rid of silos. I don't think you have to get rid of them. I just think you need to have a culture of trust, because in a culture of trust, communication is fluid. In an organization of trust, the senior pastor can call the administrative assistant of the middle school guy and have a conversation with him or her. And when the middle school guy hears about it, he doesn't go, "Oh my gosh, I wonder what they talked about." The middle school guy goes, "I'm sure they were just talking about my raise or my bonus, or perhaps, I just assume, I just believe the best," right? And listen, I'm telling you, I've experienced this on both sides.
The rest of the video is incredible. Can someone get the lights, please? The rest of this video is incredible, but for time, we wanted to make sure that that we cut it off at some point. So before we go beyond this, I wanted to just give us a second to breathe and to just air out any takeaways. Is there anything that that you heard, or anything that you kind of got thinking about that that you want to share with the group? We'll capture some of them up here. I'll start. For me, I remembered as Andy was talking about, like when the senior pastor calls the youth ministries assistant or whatever, and the guy's like, "Oh, I'm just going to assume like the best." When I first joined staff, the kindergarten and fifth grade teams, at least in Oakley, had not had a consistent staff leader for about 2 years. So that's a long time for a garden to go unweeded and untended. And so it felt like there were a lot of things, like just quality control kinds of things, that we just had to like chop, let's fix this. What I uncovered as I started doing that, like systematically going room by room by room at each service, was that volunteers started calling me a red pen. Like I'm going in and just saying like all the things that are wrong. And what I realized, like processing what Andy's saying, is I was operating out of suspicion, so they were operating out of suspicion as well, right? There were things that needed to be fixed, and I'm sure everybody would have agreed, yeah, we've known that we need to fix that. But I came in, I led with what is going on in here, And so that fostered this culture within my teams anyway of, so that's one thing. I don't know how I'd summarize that. How would I summarize that?
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts or reactions to what he was saying?
I thought it was interesting that he said you won't find the untrustworthy people until you trust them. That's kind of counter to what we typically do.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about that. Like tease that out, like maybe from Kids Club, but maybe from other.
Yeah. I mean, at least for me, I typically would probably approach somebody as they have to earn my trust. So I'm not going to give them trust until they do something to prove that they're trustworthy. So to just give that trust in an effort to let them either run with it or show that they're not trustworthy is kind of, it would be opposite for me. So that's
counterintuitive.
Yeah,
sure.
So that was interesting.
Sure. I do think a lot of these principles like apply regardless.
Yeah.
Any of you guys thinking like in terms of like thinking about my room or thinking about my team or how our team operates? Have you experienced a lack of trust? Have you experienced a lot of trust within Kids Club?
Yes. I'd say my group, we all were kind of knew each other beforehand through young adults. We kind of met each other, so we all kind of clicked really well. I know B. Milliman. I've known her for about 2 years because she was in my pop to that group. So we have a lot of trust just because we knew each other and we were able to kind of work well together through that. But it's kind of cheating because we knew each other beforehand, but it just kind of made it easy to, because we already had those relationships kind of set up. And we're kind of in the same life phase too. So I think that helps because we're around the same age and we kind of bond over that.
Yeah, and so I would respond to that. Thanks for sharing that. Because that leads into our next thing about shepherding. But my response to that would be, that's not cheating, that's hacking it.
Right.
Because real talk, like, we want our groups to be our teams. We want our teams to be our groups, right? I think we give a lot of lip service to that idea that, like, hey, you guys, if you're going to service together and then you have this in together, like, you can have an out. You should serve together. A lot of times we say that, and then actually putting it into practice is, like, logistically just hard. And so we back away from that. But what you're talking about is you were able to leverage trust because you guys had already built up a relationship, right?
Right.
Like, I think that's a hack. I don't think that's cheating. Like, I don't think it's cheap at all. I think that's how you do it, and that's, like, the good. Like, that's how you get to the good stuff. Personally. Yes.
Kind of building off of that, just like consistency, I feel like builds trust, because if you see familiar faces, you kind of have like that underlying trust there that, like, they're gonna have your back. Like, I know our 1145 nursery team, like, we bounce around all different rooms. Like, we don't really serve in one room, so we work with each other all the time, which is cool. So that we all are like one giant team, because with the smaller, downstairs, they're all small rooms, so you only serve with one or two other people, right? Versus upstairs where you have the bigger teams. So I think just being able to kind of go around and see the consistent faces builds the trust in the whole team.
I agree for sure. And I think with a lot of these downstairs teams here, I mean, you talk about silos, it can feel that way. It can feel like, especially if a person heard, oh, you want to get plugged in and get to know people around here, sign up to serve somewhere. Like, join a serving team, and then you end up with a different student volunteer each weekend. Like, it can be tougher to find it, particularly in some of our environments. But you're right, with consistency, we can fight against that. Did you have something?
So I'm going to go in a little bit different direction with it, but what I was hearing in that is, with the holding up beliefs versus expectations, and believing the best and assuming the worst. Because I think about the kids, and whenever you have kids that are behaving badly or anything like that in the room, you can either choose to assume the worst about them or believe the best about them. And I think Crossroads does a great job about that, but a lot of the other churches that I've been to, the volunteers constantly assume the worst about the kids. Like, oh, they're just a bad kid, and that's why they don't listen, and that's why they're all over the place. Whereas, I think our job is to believe the best constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. In Kids Club, some staff who have kind of taken it upon themselves to, like, disciple other people. I don't know if they came up with this, but they say leadership is parenting. All leadership is parenting. Yes. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. Just this idea that you're not lording over it like you were responsible for them, and when you're responsible for a kid, or you're responsible for a family member, that's very different than being responsible for, like, someone who's under me. You know what I mean? That's good. So let's move on now to the next topic. This is really good. We'll keep making this kind of a landing place for epiphanies, and then we can just take a picture of it. The next part that we're going into is how to shepherd a flock. And this might seem like a kind of a strange topic. It might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, but this is actually one of my favorite things to teach. So this is a real stock image of an Israeli or Palestinian shepherd, and that's the kind of shepherd that we're going to talk about right now for a sec. So a few years ago, when Crossroads started really trying to make this Israel connection happen, which has led to real encounters and different things like that, the guide that they met with is this guy named Aryeh. You remember the Easter experience from a few years ago? He was the old guy who's like, I taste him, that guy. Aryeh is like just this whiz bang guy. He's been in the army. He like fought in real wars. He led battalions, or a word like battalions. And now he's a tour guide. He's a Jesus follower in Israel, which puts him in the minority. And he does these tours, for Bible stuff. Well, he took the student ministry and kids club teams and a few other folks out into this field and started teaching them about shepherding. And this is the kind of teaching that he gave them in kind of a condensed form. So I'll flip to John chapter 21, and this is the last chapter of John, of the Gospel of John. And just for context, Jesus is about to do what's called reinstating Peter, or this is like the common understanding is this is when Jesus reinstates Peter. Peter is the disciple who's really impetuous. He cuts off the dude's ear. He says things when he's not supposed to say things. And then he denies Jesus 3 times. After Jesus dies and he rises again, Jesus has this exchange with him. So just starting in verse 1. After this, so after Jesus appeared to his disciples, Jesus revealed himself again by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of the disciples were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. They said to them, we'll go with you. So they went out and got in the boat, but at night they had caught nothing. So just as dawn was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. And he said, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. And just to summarize what happens next, they throw their nets over the side. And the Bible is very specific and clear here. They catch 153 fish, which is weird. That's like super weird that they would know how many fish. And why? It's because these Jewish fishermen were fishing in a Roman lake, and there was a tax per fish that was levied on them. So they would have to count their fish. And how do fishermen count? Simon Peter was a fisherman by trade. You guys ever watched like fisherman shows on TV, like Deepest Catch and things like that? Like they go fast. They sort through fish super quick. This one's dead. This one's too small. This one's diseased. This one's fine. Like they're just going through all that really, really fast. So they get these nets, they bring them back to shore, and they know there's 153 of them because they have to pay. So that's important to remember. Fishermen sort fish fast. Jesus and Peter. Now, when they'd finished breakfast, they eat some of the fish for breakfast. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon Peter, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to Jesus, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Why is Jesus being so repetitive? He says the same thing 3 times, doesn't he? But he actually doesn't. He says, feed my lambs, shepherd my flock, or tend my flock, feed my sheep. That's what he says. Those are different. In Hebrew shepherding, these are very different tasks for a shepherd. And it depends on the kind of sheep that the shepherd is interacting with. So all of this also comes from the question, do you love me? Do you love me? So if we love Jesus, we will do these things. First, feed my lambs. So lambs are baby sheep. Lambs are newborns. They're like walking around knock-kneed. They can't really feed themselves. So what does the shepherd do? He gathers them up. They're small. They're gentle. He gets to know them by name. One-on-one attention. He's feeling their hooves. Like, is anything caught in them? He's feeling around on his fur. Like, is anything caught? Is everything okay? He's checking for diseases. He's getting to know that lamb. He gets to know that lamb on a one-on-one level. Shepherd my flock, or tend my flock. This refers to what the shepherds would spend most of their time doing, which is getting the flock from one point to the next point, point A to point B. Typically, shepherds would keep their flock in a cave, which was kind of up on a hill or a knoll. And sheep move super slow, and they're really dumb. So like you're trying to get these sheep out of a cave, maybe you've got 100 of them, and you're just trying to make your way down this hill without anybody dying, right? You're trying to get them down this hill and follow this path. And down on the ground is the grassland. That's the pasture, and we'll get to that in a sec. The shepherd needs to tend that flock as they're going down. Now, in this flock, there are sheep, and in most flocks in Israel, there would have been goats mixed in. Sheep, goats. Sheep are very obedient. They follow their master's voice. They go with the masses. They hardly need to be told where to go because they're dumb and they're just going to kind of, well, they're not dumb, but they're sheep, you know, like they're just going to go where they're told to go. Goats hop around. Goats have horns. Goats charge at stuff. They start more easily. Goats will jump up onto different things and they'll jump down. They'll try to get ahead. Well, and the shepherd has to like bring them back. That's part of what the shepherd's staff is for. Also, the shepherd has a sling, and that sling is what he uses on these goats. Now, the purpose of him throwing a stone at these goats is not to hit the goat, not to injure the goat, not to wound the goat. It's to scare the goat back into line. Throw the rock with such accuracy that it bounces just to the outside and the goat goes, right, I'm supposed to go back over here. So the shepherd is not trying to harm the goat. The shepherd's just trying to get the goat back in. Now, the thing is, goats are actually super helpful in a Hebrew shepherding environment because they keep the sheep moving. They keep things going. Because sheep left to their own devices will just stay still eventually. They'll just stop. But a goat right behind a sheep is like, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going. So that's tending my flock, shepherding my flock. And finally, feed my sheep. If you love me, you will feed my sheep. If you're in the 1st century AD, does a shepherd feed his sheep? Does a shepherd go around literally with like a sack of food and feed the sheep? No. You bring them to green pastures and you let them feast on what only God can make. Only God can make grass grow. That pasture isn't something that the shepherd was like, I am going to make this grass. God makes the grass. And when the sheep get there, that's actually party time for the shepherds because a bulk of the day's work is done. They take a break. In modern day Israel, apparently they whip out portable DVD players and they watch YouTube and Netflix. They play soccer. They just hang out. Why? Because the sheep are grazing. It's peaceful. It's fun. There's like nothing, no work needs to happen right now because the sheep are just grazing. All 3 of those things are about leadership here. Now, the interesting question is, why is Jesus using shepherding language with a fisherman? Peter's a fisherman. Why is he talking to him like a shepherd? Because the work of a shepherd is different from the work of a fisherman. In Hebrew culture, they have an ethic that if you're leading a flock of sheep, you look back 9 times for every 1 time you look forward. So the goal, yes, like we are getting to the pasture, but my job as the shepherd is I look back at my flock. How are they doing? Do we have everyone? Is everyone together? How are we doing? I do that more times than we get our task done. We'll get the task done. We'll get there eventually. What is more important is that I don't lose someone along the way. That I don't go so fast that I lose a goat or I lose a sheep. Matter of fact, when Jesus is talking about the parable of the 1 lost sheep, reading between the lines, they were going quickly. 1 wandered away. How did no one notice? They were going quickly. 1 got away. And Jesus goes after the 1, right? So Jesus, being the good shepherd, is now trying to instruct a fisherman, slow down. It's not about sorting people out and doing the task. This is about making sure we're all together. How are we doing? Let's all get there together. So the application. Let's talk about some of these terms. So who are the lambs on your team? I kept using the word dumb before. I don't mean dumb in like a literal sense. But who are the people on your team? You don't have to say this a lot, but who are the people on your team who are lambs? They are happy to follow. They'll go, yeah, sounds good. I'll go wherever I need to go. I'll do whatever needs done. You've got lambs on your team, right? You've also got goats. Who are the goats on your team? Do you have anybody who's like, why haven't we fixed this yet? Didn't we? This just happened. Like come on, we're crossroads. Let's get this done. Let's fix this. Like, let's go. You need them. They keep you moving. They keep you watchful. They keep you going. A lot of times we can look at those folks and just be like, why can't I just have sheep? If you only have sheep, it'll take you forever to get where you're going. You need the people who are constantly asking the questions. You need the people who are constantly trying to move forward. Oh, sorry, I was talking about lambs before and sheep. So who are the lambs? Who are the babies? Who are the new ones? I think it would be easy for us, especially for like nursery and ones volunteers, to be like, well, they're the little babies. Yes, like there's that level to it too. There's levels within levels. But within your team, think about your volunteers. Who are the lambs? Observers? Yeah. People who just joined? Students? Are we getting to know them one-on-one? Are we getting to know, is everything okay? Is there anything that's like clinging on to you that we can get rid of? Is there anything we can do to help you? If we're fishermen, not shepherds, we're going too fast. We're not getting to know people. We're just trying to do the thing, right? When we've got new people, one of the ways we welcome them is we get to know them one-on-one. Treat them like a lamb. Get to know their name, get to know things about them. And then finally, how do you feed sheep? Within the context of your volunteer team and kids club, how do you feed sheep? When something amazing happens, celebrate. Only God could do that. Kids club didn't do that. I didn't do that as a leader. Brian Tome didn't do that. God did that. Praise God. That's amazing. Let's celebrate after serving. Or let's just get to know each other a little bit better. I think a lot of times at Crossroads, we're like, we have not celebrated for a while, therefore we will have a celebration, and celebrating will happen now. Sometimes people just want to chill out. Sometimes people just want relationship. They just want connection. They just want to be known. And not just feel known. They want to be known, like really be known. So I put an asterisk here for the goats might be your leaders in training, because just hear me out on this. Peter, the disciple, was a goat to Jesus. He was constantly speaking out of turn. He was constantly going too fast. He cut off a dude's ear when he wasn't supposed to. He's the one person that Jesus calls Satan who is not Satan. Like, he got rebuked by Jesus because he's a goat. Like, he's just always go, go, go. He's a fisherman, and he turns into a shepherd because of Jesus. I don't remember the verse. I didn't include it here, but there's a point in one of Peter's letters, which is written decades after like the book of Acts and all that stuff happens, where he uses the metaphor of shepherding. The fisherman has become a shepherd. Now, by the same token, there might be some goats who maybe Kids Club is not the place where they need to be serving. It could be that there are some situations where you've got someone who is becoming a goat, not because they want things to be solved quickly or they want things to go better within the ministry, but because they're off mission, because they need like bigger kinds of correction. And if that's the case, you as a leader have authority to tell your staff person, like, hey, we need to work on this. We need to figure out what's going on with this person. All right. So that's why the asterisk is there. We're gonna take a 5-minute break before we go into how to build a team. So if you're tuning in, the two of you. Thank you for tuning in live. Yeah, everybody say hi to the people. We're going to be back in about 5 minutes. So it's 7:10 right now. Let's be back at 7:15.
Oh, sit with you. Oh. It's really hard to break. It's a process. Yeah.
1 second, KC, open flight.
Oh, is that you? Oh, okay.
Yes, this is number 3.
Probably a true story.
I'm synchronizing things.
Oh, nice.
It said hi. Hi is that?
Oh, it is? I feel like something is always cold.
It's always what?
Cold. But sometimes
a little bit.
when I'm like in service, I'm like, I'm not going here. Just some layers.
This building's been a little strange.
I feel like it's cold in service. I feel like sometimes like it'll be like burning up.
You've been in one ski lately? Solid 15 to 20 degrees warmer than other than.
When we go in app, we have to wear coats because it's so cold.
So we just had a guy join our staff team who's an HVAC like expert. He's now our director of facilities.
Oh.
And he's finding stuff. The thing we found about one ski is, I guess the way these vents are set up, they kind of branch out from different ports or systems or whatever. Well, that one was connected to the 2's A room, which right now we're using as storage. But it's an outside room. Like it has a wall and windows that like touch the outside of the building. So it's way colder in there than it is anywhere else in the building. But the sensor is there. So what it's telling the blower is it's so cold in here, we need more heat. We send more heat. And so this room out here is getting blasted.
So how do you fix that?
Change the sensor somewhere.
Well, he found it. Like, so I'm assuming he's.
Yeah,
I know, isn't that funny?
That apparently did stuff in the Olympics. She's just like, I don't
KC201
care.
is a skier.
Oh, you're kidding.
Oh, that's so funny. I was just trying to find the live stream, and this is what I got.
That's cool.
Oh, shoot.
Uh-oh.
That book. Hopefully I can do something.
I get it.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, buddy.
It's okay.
No big deal.
It's just
It's
water.
just
Water.
Yeah. This anti-phone stuff.
Yeah.
It'll just clean the table. It's all right.
Put it on this plate now.
All right, friends, let's go ahead and be back. You can guys go in and take your seats when you finish cleaning it up. We're going to go into the final part of what we're talking about tonight, which is how to build a team. And again, these are going to be broad brush strokes. We can talk about specifics towards the end. But before we jumped into this, I thought it would be good for you guys to hear from Kristen. Kristen has kind of walked that journey recently of going from being someone who wasn't serving in Kids Club to kind of getting all those things. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. How do I click slides?
You can go sideways here.
Cool. Okay, so this is kind of the progression that I made in Kids Club. My husband and I had been coming to Crossroads since like August of 2009, and we were in undergrad, and then I was in school, and I made all these excuses about why I didn't want to get involved at Crossroads, and we would do like little dabs here and there, but nothing consistent. And so I finally graduated from school, and I was like, fine, I'm ready. I like kids. I'll do the thing. So I started observing in Kids Club, and I observed a couple different teams. I observed different hours and age groups, and the one I ended up choosing was kindergarten at 8:30, and I chose it for a couple reasons. But one, it was like cool with my schedule, like great. My husband worked out, and I would like serve, and then we'd go to church or whatever. But the real reason that I joined the team was because the leader approached me when I started volunteering, when I was just observing, got to know me, asked me my name, what my story was, and she just made it a really relatable experience. So I was a yellow lanyard. I wanted to be in Kids Club. I wanted to learn. I wanted to give back, but I was hesitant. In some of the other rooms I stepped into, I felt like they were super chaotic. No one really talked to me. I wasn't given like any specific tasks or guidance of what was supposed to happen at the hour. So I picked the team that I felt most comfortable with. And then I became a teammate. Like I did the thing, I did the class, I went through all the registration and stuff and found a couple people that said I was a good person. And then I became a member. And for a while, that was like what I wanted to do. I just wanted to show up. I just wanted to like lead a small group maybe and hang out with the kids. And that's all I wanted to do. On the weekend, yeah, so I was faithful, happy to follow. I wasn't like ready to lead Connect Time or anything. And then they asked me, why don't you like present? I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And then a couple weeks, like someone was sick and like someone didn't want to do it. So I'm like, oh, fine. So I kind of jumped to be a leader in training, not because I wanted to do that, but because I think someone, the leader in the room, saw something in me that I didn't see and still to this day probably don't see. And so she started going on vacation and would like leave me like, hey, Kristen, I'm going to go out of town this weekend. And can you just make sure that the small group ends get done and you present or whatever? Like little things. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can do little things. I spent extra time talking to that leader, like when I got there and when I left. She was really personable. She like sent me a birthday card and gave me a birthday gift, like just very thoughtful in our relationship. And I asked a lot of questions and she just encouraged me. Every time I took a step, she would give me feedback. She would just be really supportive in all those steps. And then like 5 years after Mason had been around, this person decides to go back to Mason and leaves me. And I was terrified. But by that time, she had kind of walked me through what it's supposed to be like in Kids Club and what it is to lead. And so it was pretty natural that I just got into this leader role in the room. And so I was the person that was in charge, delegating what goes on in the room, and kind of handling the tough situations, although it was 8:30, and so we didn't have too many tough situations at 8:30. But when I looked around as the leader, I realized that there weren't many members on my team anymore. They either moved away or they went to different sites. And so it was me and one other person. And so I thought, well, shoot, like that's not going to work because you can't do a team with just 2 upstairs. Now, maybe you can do that downstairs or whatever. But even downstairs, you want to have a team of more than 2 people because if one of you can't be there that weekend, I mean, that's just not going to fly. So I started recruiting observers, and that's when like my relationship with how I brought in people on the weekends and I interacted with observers changed. Kind of remembering my experience of how it felt like to feel awkward and stuff. And for the most part, I think I'm a pretty outgoing person, but when I'm in a setting where I don't know anybody and I don't know what to do, like I want to hide. And I just assumed a lot of people would be that way too. So kind of walked some people through, and eventually I came on staff, and so I could no longer lead the team, right? So I had to have that person behind me. And while I didn't have them immediately in place, I had at least 2 people that I thought I could put that person in charge, and just had conversations with each of them and figured out which one really wanted to do it. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell about walking through this path of a healthy team.
Thanks for sharing that. So I have a few questions.
Sure.
We didn't practice this, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Cool.
Sorry. So Karen was your leader when you first became a volunteer. How long did it take from you joining the team to when she went to Mason, would you guess?
2014. Like 2.5 years, I think. Long enough that I should have been okay with it by that time, but I still was like, no, I don't want to do that.
Sorry, that's not why I asked.
Okay.
I was asking just because I think
We had a good relationship.
Yeah, and if you know Karen Reed Smith, she's great. The reason I asked is I think a lot of times, especially in our culture and especially at Crossroads, we can feel like, well, I did it once. The next weekend, shouldn't it be in place? Like, shouldn't this person be ready? But what I hear in your story is this was faithfulness over time from your leader, where she was probably there more than you were, and she was patient, right?
Yeah, totally. And she really was patient with me. Like, I think I joined the team in October, and I might not have come back to volunteer again until December. Like all my family and my husband's family's out of town, so we traveled a lot, and we were dinks, and so we just had a grand old time. And yeah, she really put up with a lot. So I think I leave for like 6 weeks at a time. What? Oh, a dink is a dual income and no kids. It's a pretty awesome thing. Yeah. Come July, it's not going to be a thing anymore for us, but I know. It's yay, but it's also like, oh, no.
July what?
What?
July what?
19th.
Oh,
So I have one more follow-up question.
Yeah.
When you realized, like, oh, all the regular members are like gone, where did you look for observers to recruit? Like, what sphere of your life? Like, how did you think about where can I find more people to join?
So I really just was kind of selfish, kind of like how Michael was talking about earlier. And
how Michael was selfish?
Yeah. Well, like I kind of hacked the system. Like, so I looked around and I had a small group of girls that I was, in a community with, in a group with, and I invited them to do Super Bowl with me. I told them it was like a one-time thing. You don't have to come back. Like, just try it out. And they ended up really liking it. And I was like, well, you can come as my guest a couple times too. And if you really like it, then whatever. And sure enough, like, I think 2 or 3 of them joined, and one brought her sister along. And then we had a couple that my husband and I were friends with, and they really wanted to get involved at Crossroads. And so I encouraged them to check out Kids Club, and they ended up liking my room. So they're in there now too. So kind of grew that way. And some students. But with the students, I mean, they're a whole nother thing, like how you attract students to your room. Like, you just have to be extra, extra patient with them. Like, they are little lambs that, I mean, sometimes they're not going to do anything for your room, but just hang out there and talk to a kid, which is sometimes all you need.
Cool. Thank you, Kristen. So this diagram here is roughly the track that we want people to be on if they're in Kids Club, especially in Oakley, where we have observers. They wear a yellow lanyard. For the most part, we can assume they want to be here and they want to learn from you. They really do. The worst experiences from observers that don't have to do with like chaotic, really negative situations are when I showed up and I didn't do anything and no one talked to me. I didn't learn anything. Like the more time that an observer stands around and does nothing, the more they're gonna walk away feeling like they stood around and did nothing. So we want to make sure that we're taking them alongside and that they do something while they're here. But they have every right to be unsure about something. So in some age groups, you might ask them to lead a small group and they might be really, really unsure about that. And that is okay. They are entitled to feel unsure. If you were trying something new and somebody said, hey, would you like to take responsibility on your first day? You might also feel a bit unsure. So when they clear to a team, they become a member. By and large, people who join the Kids Club team, they're my favorite people at Crossroads because of the faithfulness you guys show. I mean, Kids Club is structured in such a way where, oh no, Kids Club is structured in such a way where, look, if my whole staff team shows up, but none of you guys show up, we don't have Kids Club. We just don't. It's not like, well, let me pull this solution out of my hand. Like there is nothing that we can offer if not for you guys. So it's faithfulness. Many members, they're very happy to follow. Remember, think about sheep. They may still be uneasy taking the lead on something, and that is also okay. A lot of folks who end up at Crossroads have church hurt of some kind or another, and some of them have been hurt because of situations where they were in leadership at their old church. We hear those stories. It's sad, but we hear those kinds of stories a lot. Well, my old church, I was really involved, and then I was kind of in charge of some stuff, and I burned out, and everybody hated me, or whatever. So they have every reason to feel a little bit uneasy. The key is patience and faithfulness, and they hit their nail. If they don't have a nail to hit, but they're faithful and they're happy to follow you, give them a nail. If you're in a room where something needs to be set up at a certain time, let that be their nail. Hey, can you set up snack time every time you're here? Can you be my snack time person? Like, and you set it up for me. Or can you be the person who sticks around after everybody else leaves and we just tidy up a little bit? We talk to the team who's coming in. Give them one thing that, like, hey, I came in, I did that thing, I did something that was meaningful and worthwhile. Now, of those two, we have a lot of these folks. When people begin to start distinguishing themselves, that's when, especially we as staff, we want to know from you as leaders, who could be a leader on your team? Like who is somebody who's kind of bubbling to the surface, has a lot of ideas, maybe they're showing a few goat tendencies, but they're really on mission, they really care about doing things well. Like, how can we harness that? How can we use that? I think it's Andy Stanley. He says that he would rather, I'm trying to remember now, he would rather have somebody who doesn't know how to do something but knows why they're doing it than someone who knows how to do something and just doesn't care about why. So if there's someone who's really passionate, really wants to do things well, like, frankly, we need more of that. I was just looking at this kind of diagram we have up in our office. I should have put it up here. But when Eastside launched, and if anybody's watching from Eastside, we're really, really happy that you guys launched, and we love you. But when Eastside launched, we lost 16 key leaders from Oakley, just in Kids Club, to go and launch that site. Now, really, they need more leaders. They really do. And we also need to backfill. Like, we need people who are willing to step up and say, you know what, there's no other sites coming out of Oakley anymore. Like, this is my home. This is my Kids Club. This is my site, you know? And so just be on the lookout for that. If you're here and you've been considering leadership, we would love to talk to you about what that looks like. But a leader trainee, roughly you would expect that person to get in charge like maybe once a month. You as a leader should also be finding rest and should be finding some margin. So if things are working really well, you should be able to step away to go to a baby shower or to go out of town for something and feel like someone's got it. And it might take time. I mean, it took 2 years in one case. But when you get to that point, that's when you begin to really reproduce yourself into another person. They spend extra time with you. I think Kristen mentioned it, but you guys should know too, like we as staff, like part of what we're supposed to do is spend time with you as a leader. If you're not getting the time you feel like you need, you got to let your staff person know, because that's a signal to them that like, ooh, I need to pay attention to what's going on here, because there's a person who wants more time with me. They want more equipping. They want more leadership. They want more whatever. But for you guys, what would it look like if you had somebody who was interested in learning how you do what you do in Kids Club? What would it look like to give them just a little bit extra time? And I'm not saying add one more thing to your calendar. I mean integrating your team and your group. The stuff you do here with the stuff that you do at home. Like people don't need another thing on their calendar, but they might want to hang out while you grocery shop. They might want to get lunch, you know, like if you guys both have a lunchtime at work. Like there are those kinds of things that we can do. We'll talk more about that in a second. And that kind of leader training will have ideas, ask questions, and then the leader like we talked about before. Now, what about students? What about students? Because we dipped into that just a little bit. There are some things, because of liability and policy and all that stuff, that students should do, and then there are some things that they shouldn't do. So they should connect with kids. If they're in a room with you and like there are kids around, their nail is like, hey, see if you can memorize every kid's name. Or see if you can find out as many favorite toppings of pizza from these kids as you can. Or lead this game right here, because I need to be doing this thing. Why don't you go ahead and lead this game with this group of kids? They should be doing games. They should be bringing the fun. That's one of the easiest wins for a student is, did I have fun today? Well, if they had fun, kids had fun. Like that's just the way the teenager thing works. And if they lead, they should be under a lot of supervision. We can talk more about that later. Things they should not do, really anything concerning safety. We love students. Sometimes they haven't lived long enough to have the best judgment in some situations. Sometimes they freeze up. So if there's anything concerning safety, we really want to make sure that an adult handles that. Focus on their phone. It's been less of an issue from my perspective. I feel like for a while, I would kind of walk past rooms and see lots of students like just on their phones. With some coaching, direct coaching, like, hey, you're serving in Kids Club right now. Like that needs to go away. Like they want to do a thing well. They don't want to feel like they suck at something. So if you tell them very directly, like that phone's got to go away. My experience is they'll listen. What they won't pick up on is passive aggression. They just won't pick up on that. And then finally, checking kids in out. That has to do with safety as well. Yeah, they shouldn't be checking kids in and out. All right, so we've made it through a lot of the kind of knows, the things that we should know. But what do we do now? Like we're gonna be done in 20-ish minutes. You might be wondering, like, this is great knowledge. That video was interesting. I'm interested to learn more. But we're an orthopraxy church, right? Not an orthodoxy church. So we care about correct living. We care about putting things into practice the right way. So what do we do about these things? Well, here are just a few ideas. This is something you can do the next time you serve. Tell yourself, people over tasks. People over tasks. Our mission is not to 100% follow lessons every time kids are in the room. We want you to follow the lesson. We want there to be some quality to the experience and everything, and not just have everybody going rogue. But we need to value our people first. have I put the person over the task? One way to know if you've done that is, what was the first thing you said when you walked into the room or when the other person walked into the room with you? Was it, hey, how's it going today? I'm Chris, what's your name? Get to know them a little bit. Or is it like, hey, can you go over to that side because we need someone to go over there? That's a task. We need to get to know the person. When you're getting to know the person, call out their identity, not their mistakes. If I'm trying to do something new and the only feedback I get is all the stuff that I did wrong, I'm sorry, I'm not coming back because I suck at that. And who likes to have a repeat sucky experience, right? Call out the identity. Even if they made a mistake, if it was for the right reason. Man, I love how you were so attentive there. I didn't even see the situation, but you were there. Now, in the future, this is what we should do, but I love that you were paying attention to what's going on. I love how attentive you were. It shows that you really care about what you're doing. Man, if someone told me that every day, I'd hang out with that person all the time. You know, like I'd want to come back repeatedly. And display gratitude. I think a lot of times we go so quickly that when we're done, we just kind of say like, whew, all right, we survived. Bye. I think I've even said that. I think I've literally said that at the end of the hour, like, you know, some days we just survive, you know, and I just want it out. Am I displaying my gratitude? Am I telling people, like, I love serving with you guys. I love being on this team. I'm glad you guys were here today. So those are things that you guys can try next time. But frankly, these are things I can try next time. Bigger picture, get vulnerable. Serve the observer. Serve the new person. Tell them how things are actually going. Plan a team get-together. If you are a leader, one of the things that that we would actually, as staff, we would love to collaborate with you on is planning a team get-together. Now, because we are also trying to balance work and family and work and personal stuff, we are not always going to be able to plan it 100% and be present and host the thing, but we can work with you to figure it out. We can reserve a room for you guys so that you can have a party if you want to, or you can have some team time together. And to a point, like we have budget to recognize volunteers. We have budget for that. That is good use of ministry funds. If we go over budget, bless you. And I'm saying that maybe I shouldn't say this on video, I don't know. But as a ministry leader, if we go over budget because we spent too much blessing you guys, I'm happy. I'm really, really happy that happened. Okay. Now, does that mean that we go to steakhouses all the time and we order champagne and, you know, probably not, you know, but if there's something to celebrate, let's freaking celebrate. Like, why wouldn't we do that? We're the body of Jesus. Like, we're supposed to be the ones that the world looks to for, like, how does a healthy culture operate? And healthy culture celebrate together. Healthy families, healthy groups have those shared experiences, and always training, and we should do this, and we're going to climb a higher mountain. Like, sometimes we just hang out, all right? If you have questions about how much you spend per person, and is this a good use of stewardship and stuff like that, your staff person is happy to talk to you. As a staff person, I am happy to talk to you about that. And you can also start to identify or meet with your leader in training, your trainee, the person who's coming up behind you. If you end up going to Starbucks and you buy somebody a mocha, like, shoot, we'll reimburse you for that. What was that, $4, $5? Like God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. You can afford $4 so you can meet with your leader in training. Like, we want to fuel that kind of thing happening. And because so many other things seem so urgent, I don't think we communicate that very often to our leaders. So I own that as if you've never done that because you didn't know you were expected to or allowed to, like, I own that. You're expected to and you're allowed to. We want to help you do that. And resources. If you want more equipping, you want to listen to the stuff we're listening to, if you want to read the stuff we're reading, this is some stuff that I'd suggest. First of all, talk with your staffer. If it's been a while, get something on the calendar and talk with your staffers. There are also leadership podcasts and video stuff. I'm a podcast junkie. I don't know if you guys are too. I listen to every Andy Stanley leadership podcast episode. They are incredible. They're relevant to work. There's relevant to ministry. They're definitely relevant to Kids Club. I mean, my staff will tell you. I can't tell you how many times I've heard an Andy Stanley podcast and I'm immediately emailing my team like, oh, I just heard about this podcast. It's really amazing. Like, you guys should totally listen to it. There's also the Catalyst Leader podcast. These tend to be like kind of really, really big vision, really, really big picture things. But they're also great. And then there is a Crossroads Group Leader podcast that kind of gets into the specifics of how do you, it has a lot to do with how do you lead a group, but really it's how do you lead people? How do you lead people in a way that like Crossroads would be proud of? That we would stamp that and go, that's one of our leaders right there. That's stuff you can listen to. Reminders about the video. So the 5 dysfunctions of a team, again, worth half an hour of your time. The trust versus suspicion, that's an Andy Stanley talk. I would highly recommend listening to that in its entirety. Even listening to it tonight, I was like, oh, there's stuff that I forgot. Like, yeah, that's good stuff. And then this last video has to do with shepherding. And it really doesn't have much directly to do with Jesus. But it's about a 22-minute like kind of documentary about real life shepherds, like modern day shepherds in Idaho. One of the things that I found interesting about it is they have systems to care for their sheep. The systems exist so that the sheep are safe, so that like they're not wasting time with logistical things. The shepherds show up and they just do their thing because the systems are in place. Anyway, it's worth watching. And then books and trainings. There's a really short book about leadership called The Way of the Shepherd. It's really helpful to me. The Volunteer Revolution by Bill Hybels is about the kind of culture shift that happened in churches when churches stopped just trying to hire more people and started leaning on volunteers more, and what that means for ministry. Long story short, it frees a church up to like blow money at really, really big things, like to go after girls in India, to go after kids in Nicaragua, to go after those kinds of things, all right? And then I'd say, like, man, when we have a KC201, come. The ones that have to do with volunteers are going to be more for leaders, just so you guys know. But we're going to focus on fun and families. We're going to focus on safe and kids. Like we're gonna keep doing this until we've exhausted the whole tic-tac-toe square. So come to these. When we have a kids club training, whether it's a big one or it's just your team or just your hour, man, show up for those. We put work into them. We try to make it so that they're helpful to you, so that they serve you well. If you've never done listening training, this is a training that's offered to staff and key leads, key volunteers. It's hosted by, I think, Spiritual Growth or Community Care, one of our departments here. But these are real counselors. Like these are people with letters after their names who walk you through what does it look like to listen to a person well. How do you love a person by listening to them well? It's great. Have you guys done listening training? Yeah, you haven't done it yet. It's very good. Has anybody in the room done listening training? Okay, a few of you have. Very practical, very actionable, very helpful. And then site summits. Those are usually hosted by like our spiritual growth folks. So they often have to do with groups. They often have to do with like the stuff outside of the weekend, outside of this building. Very helpful, very practical. The next ones that are coming up are at the end of March and in April. They're like on either side of Easter. It's the Saturday before Easter and the Saturday after Easter. I think it's like March 27th and April 7th or something like that. But come to those. We're talking about emotionally healthy spirituality, which now I think there's another book that you might want to check out. But It has to do with how do you maintain a healthy spiritual life, a healthy emotional life, while leading. Leaders are especially susceptible to all kinds of attacks, all kinds of things with like identity stuff and everything. How do you manage that? Like, what does God have to say about that? So I'd say to come to that. These are the questions you asked. Hopefully, we addressed most of, if not all of these. But I wanted to make sure that we left a little bit of time at the end. We've got about 14 minutes. Those of you who are tuning in, if you want, you can chat in a question as well, and it'll pop up on my screen. But do you guys have any questions? Anything that we've talked about tonight? I'm a little bit like a fire hose. I know that I can just kind of go. I really like to talk, and I really like Kids Club, and when those two come together, I can really just go. But big picture or like super specific and tangible? Like, do you guys have any questions?
What were those dates again for the on-site that you were saying?
Let me look it up. So it's the Saturday before Easter and the Saturday after. I think Easter is on April Fool's this year.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure it out.
Which is ironic.
Yeah. So you said
March 24th and April 7th.
And April 7th.
They are exactly the same, offered on those two separate days. We just figured that.
And do we sign up for that somewhere?
Yeah, you should be getting communication about it hopefully in the next month. But it might not come from your Kids Club person. It might come from Crossroads. So if you're like me, and a lot of times you mark those as red and just move them into the next folder. I don't do that for all of them, but for a lot of them, I'm like, yeah. The thing is, sometimes I get like 5 copies of it, and I'm like, oh, yeah. Anyway, so look for that. It'll be called the Site Summit, or like the Oakley Summit.
So I will just say, honestly, I'm trying to figure out, so we do the twos, and it's my husband and I and our son. And so, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so what's the team? Who's the leader? How can we like do everything that you talked about tonight and be able to apply all that? Because we feel, honestly, I don't want to say isolated, but I feel like we come, we serve, we leave. I don't know if we're part of a bigger team, and that's probably our fault for like, not maybe asking more questions or whatever, but I feel kind of isolated a little bit. But I guess we're the team.
Mm-hmm.
I don't,
Well, we know who the leader is.
Well, he teaches.
Good man there.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to figure out how we take all that we learned tonight and apply it to our situation.
Sure.
And maybe it's just because we're just we're just the twos, and
I'd
just
recommend reaching out to the other twos that serve in your hour, because like we serve typically in a nursery by ourselves.
Well, how
too.
do you find them?
In nursery, yeah, and then
Over there.
nursery, like we have a little bit more flexibility. Like if there's 3 of us in the room, we can walk the halls. So like
yeah,
I'll take a baby
never leave
and
our
like
kids.
I'll say hi to like everyone in the other rooms, and then like make a loop. And,
We got to know everybody during the fire drill.
And we had an observer that day, and she was awesome.
Well, when you do have observers, one of the things that we could do better with is following up with them.
Right.
So, like, work with Tulare to figure out like what's the strategy, what's the plan around it.
Yeah.
Like how would you define the win? But like if I were trying something out, and I wasn't sure if I did a great job, and then in the mail, I got a note from you that was like, "Hey, Chris, like, you rocked XYZ. That's exactly what we want to see more of in Kids Club. We loved the way that you served." Now, the specific execution on that, like, we can figure that out. But like thinking about that person getting just that personal touch, that might be something to try. And like you joked about the fire drill, but the instructive thing about that is we had to get together outside of the silo. Like we had to get out of the room and kind of around other people. So what does that look like? I know there are some teams that Leaders have decided to like go ahead and host like a cookout at their house, or they go out like once a quarter together. The team that Kristen was on would they would go to brunch. Like they would serve together.
But so they serve together in the room, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I'm wondering, so like we get there early, we stay there and then the kids don't leave until like right before we're getting ready to go into church.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to figure out how to connect with our other team.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Did you have any thoughts?
Maybe we are the team. I don't know.
Oh, this is Talaria. She
Yeah,
leads the twos and pre-K team.
You're right.
And she's awesome.
She is awesome.
She's great.
She's a great communicator.
Yeah, and we take for granted sometimes that people don't know the difference. So I don't know if you know, like upstairs, for instance, teams that Kristen leads, kindergarten at 10 o'clock, all those volunteers are in one room.
Right. That's what I
First
kind of
grade,
figured.
second grade, right?
Yeah.
So it's very different downstairs. We're often paired or different things. So what I'm learning even now is the types of things that I take for granted. For instance, while ideally, right, we have two people in a room, two guys serve together as a family, and that's wonderful. We encourage that. I will often very intentionally still place a fourth person, if that's an observer or a new person with you all, because I know that you will show them the example that we want to set for twos. Not thinking, oh, I should probably communicate with Kelly like exactly what we're expecting, so that she can help develop that person and why I'm doing that. So that's a miss on my part, and that's the way we put it together. What I would suggest is figuring out what I'm going to get you a list of all the other people on that team, because I would love for you to lead them more intentionally. But it looks like maybe planning something before service, because I do think that a lot of people that serve at your hour, they go to service at 11:45. So what if we came early and got together in the KC101 room or the 101 room and had a quick get together? Or like after, if many of you serve at 10 o'clock and then go to 11:45, maybe get up for brunch after the 11:45. So we can talk about how to get everybody together. And you're right, unless you have opportunities to do that outside of the serving hour, you wouldn't even know. So you wouldn't even know who those people are. So it's a bridge that we can.
And I would be remiss if these are good ideas. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention like the journey's coming up. And I know I assumed my small group like didn't want to do it as a small group. Someone's about to have a baby and yada yada. And I was surprised. One of the couples doesn't even go to Crossroads, and they're like, "No, we actually want to do this journey." Why you'd want to do an obsessed journey and you don't go to Crossroads, I don't know. But like, I think in general, the big killer of our day and age is isolation, which comes with depression and all that stuff. So the answer is community.
Right.
Now, how we do that, like the timing of that, I would rather see you guys like trying stuff and it completely failing, but we at least tried something and we learned something, than like just not being sure and hesitating. That personally, that's what I'd rather see. And it might be surprising. Like, I don't know. We didn't give you guys a lot of lead time to plan on coming to KC201, and you guys made it here on a snow day. Like sometimes you just build it and people come. But it's a good question. But like the thing you bring up is real. Like that with some of our weekend teams, just because of the way things are set up, it can feel like I think it's just us, or I think it's just me. One of my favorite definitions of friendship comes from C.S. Lewis. And he defined friendship as it happens the moment one human being turns to another and says, "You too? I thought it was just me." And I think we have that happening here. I think it's an attack of the enemy. And screw that guy. He doesn't get to win at the end. So what can we do to operate in that victory now? Love to find out. Yeah, buddy.
Do something like where we put like boosters up all across the Q's room and like leave them up there for like 2 weeks. Hey, get together on Friday, like Friday the 31st, 8 p.m. Kids Club 103, we make it.
It might be more effective than sending an email.
It's not when, it's how we check.
I use the fisherman approach.
Later.
We got time for maybe one or two more questions. That's really helpful for me to hear, like, this is all great, but my reality is.
I don't know. For me, I don't know if it's so much as a question, but just kind of going back to what we were talking about with just learning to trust other people. So I'm in the preschool. It's very much like a similar scenario, except where we do have big room, like a big group where we come together. And so I took a little hiatus from serving, but now that I'm stepping back in, one of the things that I had to remember was that I have to trust the team, even though I don't know them very well, because we're in our own little space. When we get into that big group, I have to trust that they're going to be attentive to their flock. You know what I mean? I could be attentive to mine, but we can also, interact and intermingle, and that leaves me less frustrated. So, because that was something that was happening for me, and I had to do just some self-reflection that, maybe there are observers in the room, or maybe, someone's not comfortable having a child whose behavior is not easy in the moment, redirecting that. So that's just helped me tremendously, just knowing, like, I just have to trust the process. I have to trust that they're going to do what they're going to do, and maybe they don't know what to do, and I'll get up and kind of guide or, help show them that. But it's been freeing. It's been totally free. So it's good.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
That's vulnerable to admit, like, hey, I was getting to the point where I think I was starting to not enjoy this. Yeah.
Yeah, me and Sawyer, we've had lots of good talks around that. So it's
good.
good. It's good.
Yeah.
And that's good to have someone where you can go to and say, hey, I'm frustrated and I have to figure out what that's about. And having then the patience, given back to you to say, okay, let's figure this out together, or, take the time that you need, come back when you're ready. So good stuff.
That's good. Time for one more. Let's get anything else. Yes.
So my leader, let's say, saw something in me and is kind of trying to get me towards that way too. And kind of funny, I was talking to my husband about it. He was like, so you just didn't think this was going to happen? And it just kind of made me laugh, I guess, because you try to, well, for me, I'll say, like, I came from another church, smaller, more intimate, but I've always had a heart for serving in the nursery, and it wasn't going anywhere. And it kind of just like made me stop and think, like, is it me? Like, what's wrong? But coming here and serving, it's like I've served like four services in the weekend, just because that's just me, and I enjoy every bit of it. I come out smiling, bouncing. All right, see y'all 2 weeks. Whatever.
Yeah, I've seen you.
Right. 2 babies and the third on the lap.
Yeah.
So it's definitely wanting to know, I guess, more about the leadership path. Like, really, what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah, that's something for. Like, we certainly could talk through that. I'd rather you talk through that. Is it Rebecca?
I think it's Rebecca.
Yeah, I'd rather you talk that through with her, because she'll be able to give vision around, like, specifically for your area, like what she's looking for and what the next step might be.
Okay.
Right. Hey, it's 8 o'clock. I want to honor you guys' time. Let's be done. But let me pray before we're officially done. God, thank you for tonight. What a gift. Thank you for the time that we had. Thank you that we were able to have those moments of, oh, it's not just me. That there are other leaders here who feel similar things or have addressed similar things. So thank you for tonight and for tomorrow and the weekend and all the weekends following, I bless this group of people. I bless them whether they were in this room or whether they're watching this after the fact. But I bless them to hear from you in all of the things we talked about, what their next step is. I bless them to have clarity around that. I bless them to have energy around that. I bless them to have good rest, good relationships. And I bless them that their impact would start to be felt in their teams and in Oakley and in Kids Club. I want that for them. And I know you want that for them too. So in your son's name, we say thank you, we love you, and you are good. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for
Thank you.